generalize narrative that much and like what it means in sort of like a broader sense of what narrative. Because at the beginning it's like, you know, there are some stories that everyone in the world should read. The author's intention is the most important thing to consider when engaging with a story. It's like, yeah, those are cool questions, but I think they might like be a bit distracting and muddling.
Yeah, that bit gets a bit, like I like the recognizing narratives that influence part. I think the perspective about stories might get a bit too off topic.
It's just a bit vague and
like
broad and big.
That's a huge topic to be talking about. That's literally like an entire unit's worth of like that would be like a project-based thing about like.
I think some people spend their entire lives studying things like this.
I think that could be like to do that in just a lesson.
But reflecting on what narrative means to us is a good sort of like introduction, sort of like why narrative's important.
And I think it's like a way to re-engage kids into it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care about writing short stories. And then you can like, tie it back into being like, this is why it's important.
Yeah, I guess so, because stories have been told since the beginning of time. It's the way we learn and understand and relate.
And that's how you could tie it again back into like Indigenous storytelling and things like that. It'd be like the narrative tradition.
And narratives can be used specifically to manipulate people into believing a certain thing about life, you know, moral positions and things. So
But that's like a critical analysis thing though. That's like, that's its own like kettle of fish.
it is.
But I also think like, just because this is a creating term, it's not like that they shouldn't do any critical analysis. Like during this term.
It's through the critical analysis that they, like, I think they could easily do a critical essay on these two texts, you know, and then through that they could be like, what perspectives are omitted, what are like, you know, who's being marginalized here, are there any other perspectives that could be shown, sort of thing. But as like a good introduction task, it is good to sort of be like, you are going to write a short narrative. Why a narrative's important, you know, let's otherwise, you know, 6 weeks in, kids are going to be like, why am I bothering doing this, you know? And it's like, well, remember how we talked about how these are important?
Yeah, because I know most people in my class in English hated creative writing.
Oh, yes.
So we're like, I'm not creative, I don't know how to do creative writing. I was like, I studied creative writing, so I was like, I gotta love this. But like, they were all like, can't we just write essays? Like,
but you can teach them the skills, right?
yeah, and also I think it was never taught to us about why narratives are important.
Yeah.
It was always just like, you have to write a short story that.
That's true.
So it was never emphasised about like the impact.
The value of it to society.
So people were just like, well, I'm not creative, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, actually, it doesn't have to be just about being creative. It's about like telling messages and things like that. And that was never really.
Yeah, the critical skills and stuff like that, and you know, like perspective taking and blah blah blah. All the things, you know, the underpinning factors that you get from. Like, it's good for society. I think it's good for yourself. I was quite dismissive. You know, I was like, why do I? Like, I get frustrated and be like, why do I have to do this? And I honestly think a lot of people just like aren't creative, and it's a real
struggle.
It's a real problem because they don't. And I don't think it's sort of like this innate thing. I think it can be taught. But it can be like, it can become if you just sort of like have opportunities to do it.
Yeah.
And you do have opportunities to do it in school, but a lot of kids just don't want to do it.
Yeah, I think it's the way it's spun, whereas like because we were never told why we were doing these texts and like the meaning that can be created from those texts, kids were like, oh, it's just an inherent creative ability to write short stories, instead of being like, no, people put thought into this and it's carefully constructed to present a message. It's not just like someone's good at writing short stories. And I think that's, I don't know, I find creativity is like a self-fulfilling prophecy of like, if you think you are creative, you tend to be more in that sense, whereas like the kids who shut themselves down are then bad at it because they think they can't do it, and it's like.
So what I'm hearing, Liam, you've been quiet, you've got an opinion?
Not really.
What I'm hearing though is that you guys feel very strongly about students understanding the why of what they're doing, and that actually very closely aligns to my teaching style. It's the so what factor, because I'm always very aware that my students in the classroom are going, so what? So
It's
what?
like 90% of engagement.
So what?
Yeah, because then you just have a kid being like, Miss, I don't care.
Yeah,
and so you're like, they always
They
have to have
will.
an answer and be like, this is what you should get.
But I think one of the bullet points that saves this learning experience, even though I wrote, is this necessary, and I ticked it, was exactly as you said before, contemplating how these qualities could be applied or deliberately avoided in the stylistic devices and aesthetic features, that's syllabus language, used in their own narratives. So what we're doing there is we're giving them top quality linen texts, saying what do you like, what do you not like, why do you like them, and do you think you could use a similar device in your own story? Because when they see it in operation in someone else's text, when they've lived it through that reading, then they can make conscious decisions about what they like, why they like it, and how to even create it in their own. So yeah, it's interesting. The other thing that you said that was really interesting was that you were talking about the introduction to the unit, and I raised the question, what part of the, the unit is this actually occurring in? And you said we would talk about it being the orientation phase, wouldn't we? Remember orientation, enhancing and synthesis? We can see quite clearly that this is an introduction to narratives and why bother and so on. Even getting students fired up about those statements at the start, relationships with the land are a critical component of who we are as individuals. You might get some students who disagree vehemently with that.
I would definitely, if I was doing this, I would start off with that question, because I think it really
See, that one I was like, that's super relevant to the actual task. Like some of those got super out of it, like they weren't relevant. Really.
If you just start off with like, what do stories mean to you?
Yes.
I don't think you're going to get the kids anywhere back to where you want it to be. And it's all like important discussion, but it's very loose and unstructured.
And trying to relate that back to the task, you're just like, oh my god.
Yeah.
I think that's going to take a lot of you like asking specific questions to try and get them back, I think. Whereas that one is immediately relevant.
Yeah.
That last question.
Yeah.
Because it incites a reaction, doesn't it?
And you can be like how a story is relevant to, Australian representations, or what is it, I would just like, I think there's other ways to approach it, but like some of these, like, there are stories that everyone in society should read is very broad.
Yeah, you can narrow it down being like, is there a universal Australian experience or Australian representation or something, if you wanted to.
That's what I did for my assignment in the last one. I was doing like a unit thing, and it was like, is there an Australian story? That was kind of like how I started off it. Like what, it was kind of like, what are some features or themes that are common to Australian narratives, and does it even exist?
That's a way of starting,
Yeah.
Notice that there's a gap in the possible resources column, and yet the students somewhere here access non-fiction texts about the benefits of engaging in the narrative in film. So that's a little bit of a boo-boo.
Yeah, it's not very. They do put the resources in some of the resources are in the main column with like students examine texts in both contemporary and different eras, and it puts the text there. But
that's true.
But yes, so some of these are a bit vague. They access web links to units 1 and 2, the canonical texts. Like if I was like suddenly studying this, I'd be like, what were those texts?
You'd have to go and find them.
Yeah, I have to go find them myself.
Is the other thing I'd like to point out, is that scaffolding differentiation strategy of bridging, taking students from the familiar to the unfamiliar with anticipatory activities focused on the required genre and construction of texts, is that differentiation strategy actually doing what the learning experience?
No, it doesn't think it occur.
Yeah, I wondered if there was a disconnection there. Can you see a connection?
Taking students from the familiar to the unfamiliar with anticipatory activities focused on the required. I don't know what that means.
I can see that those prompts there, those statements are meant to be a little bit inflammatory and lead students into thinking about the genre, the required genre of the narrative. But
like it doesn't seem like it's bridging, it seems like it's just introducing.
yeah.
Like it doesn't seem to link to narrative really that much.
You know what it needs are, it needs bridging, taking students from what they know and understand about narratives
Yeah.
to Liam. Were you gonna say something?
So should there be some sort of like diagnostic stuff in there? Just find out what they know first and then bridge towards,
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool.
like, what do they know about short stories first before that you go into like what they need to know?
That would be valid. this is year 12 and you might have taught them in year 11, but you can't make that assumption. They might be students you have never seen before.
Like, I think scaffolding assumes that you kind of like know where they are. Like, I think it assumes that you've already done some sort of like diagnostic thing.
Well, that actually leads into my question. Where do you think this does actually sit? Do you think it's orientation, or do you think it's a little bit further back from that? Like, do you think it's the first lesson, or do you think it's, see, maybe, like Liam says, maybe some of that diagnostic stuff has been done. So maybe it's not the first lesson.
Yeah.
Maybe it's the second or third lesson.
Yeah.
At any rate, if you can just let me know when you're doing your TLAT where you're at.
So should that just be in our rationale?
I don't want you wasting time in your rationale for that. Just make it very clear, starting at second lesson.
Okay.
Well, I think there should be like a column for like, formative assessment and stuff like that, you know, like check-ins. That would help me as a teacher.
Oh, so if you want to do that, just add a cell in here, because you can break up the columns into cells and just do your diagnostic in there.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Yeah, maybe like exit ticket sort of question or like quiz or something like that. That would remind me to be like, okay, I should definitely like check that they've actually understood what the purpose of this like learning experience is.
That's an excellent strategy.
So
I
we
really
can
like
include
it.
like
Exit
essentially
ticket,
assessment column, and then just be formative, diagnostic, all different ones.
I reckon you'll have trouble lining it up in the cells, unless you have discrete cells for each learning experience.
Okay, so it might just be at the bottom of each learning
Yeah,
experience.
at the bottom of each learning experience will be fine. It could actually be its own bullet point. Exit slip.
Yeah.
To feed forward to next lesson. The other thing I wanted to say was the overall focuses and activities and goals. There's some nice work there. I couldn't see any evidence, the bottom bit, which I think is absolutely critical. Students review their work after receiving peer and or teacher feedback by answering the following questions. How effective were my aesthetic features and stylistic devices in creating the desired effect? What changes can I make to my language choices to improve readers' experiences? How effectively does my response connect to the original stimulus? That's the prescribed text. What does the feedback advise me to develop or improve? What would I like to explore further to develop my writing style? Was there any evidence of stopping and pausing in those learning experience where the students were actually given 10 minutes to receive feedback or to provide feedback and then to make some improvements?
Where is this bit from?
It's right at the top.
Right at the very top in the first cell.
There's like
gotcha.
Second
yeah.
cell, sorry.
I guess it's like the ongoing activities is like, maybe the ongoing activities is like the feedback, but yeah, they don't sort of like embed that.
Yeah, it's never
into
signposted that like we'll be doing peer critiquing or something.
They do at the end. They
Yeah.
sort of have like they share work with each other, I think.
Oh, and they create some dialogue and they get
Yeah,
some
they do
feedback
that.
on that.
There's a lot of like putting it on Padlet, but a lot of it just seems to be like put this on Padlet and then it's never
worked.
We'll look at this afterwards. Like it's like you'll be posting this on Novo.
Actually, that's a really good point. If you are using Padlet, then in your learning experience, say something like, student responses on Padlet discussed and explored in class further.
Yeah, because that
Really
seems to happen
teasing it
here.
out.
It just seems to be put there. I guess it in itself is using the teacher could be using it as formative.
Yes, that's true too.
But
Actually,
that's
in
never
fact,
really made clear.
Liam, that's a really good thing that you could do, and it would take up maybe 20 words, is to have a Padlet being used as diagnostic. And it could be something like, what is the structure of a narrative?
Yeah, see if they actually know
What
it.
are the parts?
That way you can sort of skip over that if everyone is.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be pretty cool. The objectives are missing in some of the columns. Like when you go down to the third cell where it says, and the text is, I would suggest that they are actually objectives 3, 4 and 5, but they're not included. Actually they no they're not, yes. So there are no objectives listed for that particular cell where it says schema building. Can you see that, schema building?
So would you put objectives into each cell there
Yes.
to try and, okay, yeah, fair.
Yeah.
Where, sorry?
in the schema building.
Oh,
so
yeah.
there are no objectives listed there. So I then had to work hard at working out which ones they were, and we know that there's 3, 4 and 5. There might actually be some other objectives in there as well.
Oh, okay. So for each learning experience shouldn't have an objective, right?
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or multiple ones.
Because
Oh,
otherwise
multiple
it's like,
ones.
why are you doing it?
Because it's like, yeah, it's just sort of like if you do, I reckon that would make it easy for me because they just list all the objectives right at the top there in the left hand column, and then just sort of assume that they'll each come through these learning experiences.
That's right. So I don't even know, we don't even know if that learning experience is attached to a specific objective, and we can't even, it's harder to do the ticking off.
Yeah, I can sort of see it, but I can see, I can glean it a little
Yes.
bit, but I can't.
And that's probably because the learning experiences are quite rich. If your learning experiences aren't rich, then you're not going to, in a lot of instances, you're not going to be quite sure which objective is actually being taught. And that just helps you audit yourself. And I can see objective 9 coming in to that last cell where we're talking about reflecting on Australia as a home and setting for the film. At this, in the second paragraph where it's got students read several short descriptions of various Australian landscapes in a variety of texts, including the rural outback and the commission and the turning, and student writes poetry. They highlight and circle particularly evocative phrases that target the senses and describe the way they work to elicit audiences' responses. So they're looking at language choices there, so that's objective 9. And I reckon that's a lovely activity. Then down where it says students read a chapter in Heart of Darkness and circle adjectives and figurative language. That's language choices, objective 9, as well as you can argue objective 5. And then they analyse how they shape specific representation. So you can see objective 9 working there with objectives 3 and 4 and 5. But there's no numeracy activity.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
We can tick off ICT. And there's something else that I think is missing and should be there, and I've talked about it quite a lot actually.
In terms of like 21st
Particular
century skills.
objectives. Particular objectives I think are missing. Especially for grammar Nazis. Where's the spelling and punctuation and grammar? There is literacy in terms of critical literacy, but what about basic literacy? And I don't mean basic as in basic, I mean the construction of a sentence. Where is that?
Yeah, I think that could easily be slot into the like poetry work when they're looking at different texts like that. Or even like when they're reading Heart of Darkness.
Yeah, have a look
You're
at.
looking at simple and complex sentences and things like that.
Absolutely.
Also, they don't really like. I don't know, objectives 6 and 7 about select and synthesize and organize and sequence. I think I would put effort into that about sort of like, you know, like narrative structure and stuff like that, you know, and like how would you sequence it, or even at like a real sentence like level. I read this thing the other day in my film and television class, and we have a similar sort of thing that we have to mark off, and it's like, you know, sequence and structure. And it's funny, they put headings for like this essay, but they hadn't actually, the headings didn't matter at all. And I thought that was really funny because the person they were kind of smart in that they had read the task sheet, and they're like, okay, I'm going to structure this, right? And then they put these like introduction, like, you know, topic, conclusion. But like that didn't matter at all. And so I was like, you haven't actually like sequenced this in any way. You haven't structured it in any way.
They haven't done what they've indicated that they were going to do.
Yeah,
It's hilarious, isn't it?
It's like just because you put a heading doesn't mean it actually is like.
It's sequenced.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty like sly.
It is sly. Okay. All right. So that's going to give you a lot of guidance when it comes to your assessment. Let's now have a look at some more stuff.
I just have a quick question about
Yes.
the A1, the quiz. Is there any way for us to prepare for that? Or is like just coming to class and talking about the syllabus?
You can guarantee that everything that we are doing in class is preparing you for that quiz. If I repeat stuff or emphasise stuff, then there might be a good reason for that. I will probably try and do a little bit of a revision with you to summarise the learning to date up until a certain point prior to the quiz. And that won't be targeted solely to the quiz, but it will give you, it'll just be a moment in time where I just do a quick revision about the learning up to that point in time. Read into that what you will.
Okay. I just feel like we just haven't spoken about it. I keep forgetting it's coming up, and I'm like, I don't know what to do.
It's very much in the forefront of my mind, and I don't believe you'll get any answers on the quiz that would be a surprise, or that you can't find out.
Yeah, because that's what I mean. It's open book, so couldn't it just be you can find it in the syllabus? The answers should be there. But then there's the longer response bit, which I'm assuming.
Yes.
Will any of it be that we have to like reference?
Oh, not really. Like
Can it
it's
just be us being like
you're just
chatting?
yeah.
Not chatting, academic language.
You can get the information if you can't get it straight away. The syllabus is there, PowerPoints are there, Blackboard's there. The world is at your fingertips.
Yeah.
It's not meant to be tricky or trip you up.
We have 3 hours for it, right?
It's 24 hours.
I think once
Or
you
once
open
you've
it, you've got a
3 hour
window. Yeah, I wasn't sure if it was 2 or 3, but yeah, there is a set time to do it.
And that's still happening as it was said.
Week
Okay.
7.
You don't want to really postpone assessment because it feels good at the time, but then it all just something has to be done, and
Yeah.
like it feels good, but it's not often not. Extensions aren't always.
That'll all be in the new Easter break, won't it?
Yeah, well, day by day at the moment, just keep an eye on your emails, I think. Okay, so, now this was just something to think about. What I'm really keen to do, and I think I'll come back to this another time, maybe even, but before I do that, we have looked at the following objectives in some detail, some in considerable detail. 11 is missing there, but that's meant to say 10 and 11. Are there any objectives that you really would like to work on a little bit more, that you really don't understand as well as you should, that you're not sure that you would be able to create a learning experience around? And you don't have to answer me right now, but if you want to just jump on Edmodo and say, can we do more work on objective 3 or 2?
I don't know, some of them just come across as a bit vague, like 6 and 7.
Yes.
To me, I just find a bit like wishy-washy.
Yeah, that's something that we can do some explicit learning around.
I don't know, something about like, because we're doing a lot of similar stuff in our other unit for our TA2s. So many of it just seems like you read the sentence and you don't process any of it.
Yes.
Because it's just like buzzwords and you're like, this isn't even a coherent sentence, like they're just saying everything and it's like.
But that's also because it's the first time you've seen it, and I don't know if you've heard this, but apparently the brain needs to hear something 7 times before it sticks. Something to do with patterns, and 7 times.
I don't know if it's just me, but I find it like so dense.
It is dense, and that's why I'm trying to bring them to life for you here in lots of different ways. Are there any objectives that you'd like to spend more time on? You don't have to answer it now, but if there are, jump on Edmodo and say, can we please spend more time on, like objectives 6 and 7 just came up there. Because we're still very much in the, we're only week 4. And remember that, we're week 4.
Oh my god, it feels like we've been in this semester for 8 years.
I
just can't.
So I mean, we don't expect you to be experts at all, but I want to be responsive to what you feel that you need, and if you have a specific knowledge gap, I want to know about it.
I just think it's gonna just become a bit clearer and clearer.
As you do.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff in here that is just sort of like arguing semantics though, which will always sort of be a bit up in the air, you know, like, but that's just being a teacher, you know, sort of like, someone's interpretation of it is gonna be different, and so you're gonna like end up being like, well, I don't think this is like a concept, I think it's more like this.
So we need to be flexible thinkers too, which is a 21st century skill.
Yeah, because I had a little look the other day, because I was like, attitudes, values, and beliefs. I actually sort of did a little bit of research into that, because I was kind of like, what is that? Like, it seems.
What's the difference between them?
Yeah, it's like, it seems like something that you go, yeah, I can like define that. You know, it's like gun to my head. But then I was like, I actually really need to sort of investigate this a little bit more, so I did some research.
So if you have a look at that objective, I'm really glad you raised that, and this is a really important point. When you look at, okay, stay on the assessment objectives for the IA1, have a look at objective 4.
Yeah.
Note that it's the conjunction of and, you've got a coordinated conjunction there. So it's analyse the ways cultural assumptions, attitudes, values and beliefs underpin different texts.
Yeah.
But if you go, which means you've got to do all 4, right?
Yeah.
Go to your ISMG.
That one.
Yep. Which is only a few pages over, and still, it's and. Whenever you see and / or in some of these, I'm just trying to find one for you. Lucky for us that they are so closely connected that they do work nicely as a collective, like as an actual group. I mean, when I think of those things, an attitude is a position. It's the student has the attitude that sometimes it's arguing about semantics. That is an attitude. It's a position. When I think of values, I want to say 1984, or the author of 1984 values freedom and liberty, because this whole book is a warning against the removal of civil liberties. If you look at beliefs, I could pick up, let's say this TILA. Something about this TILA. I could say that the writer of these teaching and learning experiences believes in the value of narratives and their purpose, but not necessarily grammar, because it's not there. See what I mean? And cultural assumptions, that is when assumptions are made about a particular culture in a text. So if you pick up an ad, and the ad is someone doing physical activity, and the caption is something like exercise to be fit and healthy, there's a cultural assumption that exercise is valued, isn't there?
Yes.
Whereas another culture might think that a physical job is a better way of maintaining fitness and health and well-being. So each cultures have their own assumptions embedded within them. One of our Australian cultural assumptions would be that exercise is valued, very generally speaking. Whereas in another cultural text or ad or film, there might be other cultural assumptions that actually don't value exercise at all as a means of keeping fit. So when you look at a text, it's always having a look at what assumptions are being made about what is normal and what is expected.
Yeah, I get that.
So it's they kind of work together.
The way I sort of look at it is that like beliefs underpin values and attitudes, because your beliefs are like, you know, it's your philosophy, it's how you like look at the world. And then your attitudes are sort of like your enacted sort of like relationships with people. Like, I can be pissy towards you, I can be nice towards you, I can have that particular attitude. And through that, you sort of like, yeah, like beliefs underpin everything, and then it sort of affects like what you value, what you hold higher, what you hold
Yes.
lower, and then like that affects your attitudes, which how you actually like, how you act towards people.
Yeah, no, that's good. You've done some really deep thinking about that, because that's quite complex. Breaking them apart and understanding them and how they relate to one another. Now, I'm just going to show you a little bit of this. So this is a clip that this is how I used to teach grammar and spelling and punctuation in the classroom. So this is with year 8s. And you can tell me when you're bored and you want to. Yeah. Yeah. Let's see if I can get that.
So what we're looking for is quality writing, good, well-chosen, that was a little one. Well-chosen adjectives, showing, not telling, quality writing that actually transports us away from this classroom for the moment. So let's have a look. So we just had Rachel shivered. Every step she made was hesitant. We need this. Remember, your goal is to say what you need to say in as few words as possible. That's your golden rule, and you brand it into your brain, and you apply it in every assignment, in every subject, until you die. Okay?
Embarrassing.
That's how you do well with your work. Every step was hesitant. I mean, that's fine. There's nothing incorrect about that. But with narratives, it needs to be really sharp and pointy. So if you don't need it, take it away. If you take it away and you think, oh, I actually really prefer the way it sounded with the words in, then put them back in. But you're just going to have to cut words somewhere else. You choose where they absolutely must be. Her arms were folded in front of. So we need in front of her, like a shield. We can actually cut out more words though. I'm glad that this semicolon is here, because we've got a complete sentence on one side and a complete sentence on the other side. That means you have been listening to those little really simple rules about semicolons. But if you say every step was hesitant, her arms folded in front of her like a shield. Well, every step was hesitant, her arms folded in front of her like a shield. Is that okay? Is that okay? Every step was hesitant, her arms folded in front of her like a shield.
This is why I
Okay.
think it's okay.
Now, do we need these two words? Can we delete them? And I would like to reiterate here, it's okay for you to have those words in your first draft, that's natural. But in your subsequent drafts, get a little bit better at deleting them. An eerie tone, okay. An eerie tone, what in the air? Okay, so we could say filled, but we could say something else, couldn't we? Lingered? Is that giving us the effect we want? Maybe.
like get them to sort of like come up, read that first beforehand? Or do you just sort of like, let's just read this now and just do it?
No, so I used to do this, and this is another occasion. This is the same activity. So that was in Modo. I don't know if you can recognise the interface. I think it's changed a little bit. So at least once a week, maybe twice a week, I'd set students a task on Edmodo, write a paragraph, whether it was analytical on narrative writing, and they were doing narrative writing. And I gave them a little, like a couple of lines about this Rachel character. And then the last two words were Rachel shivered ... and then they had to finish. They had to write another, I don't know, 60 words or something. And they upload that to Edmodo.
Yeah.
That was I always used to give them about 5 or 10 minutes before the bell went to do it, so that I got something from them, and then I would get them to finish it for homework. It got to the stage though where I could set it for homework, and I knew that they would do it because they wanted their work workshopped. This is the most valuable learning you can do with students, and the reason is because it's their work and they're getting direct feedback and they're watching their own writing come to life just by adding an adjective here, taking words out there. And they actually came up with words like lingered and shrill. They're year 8s. I was just standing there doing the writing and just guiding them a little bit, but they were actually feeding me and identifying the fact that they were using the semicolon correctly. I acknowledged and made a deal of, because that's something we've been working on previously, which is grammar. So it's hard work, but it's some of the best, most honest, relevant and meaningful stuff you can do with students, because you can see all this writing up here. They're all the possible adjectives and things that they came up with that they could insert to replace that looked around. 2 words, reduce, I said change looked around to 1 word, come on, and we wrote a whole list of them, and then students can choose whichever one. So you're doing punctuation, spelling, grammar, you're doing synthesis, because you're teaching them how to synthesize their ideas in really, really good sentences. You're doing sequencing, you're showing them where to put their adjectives in front of the noun.
Doing everything.
Yeah, you're doing absolutely everything. And that's why I told you that story in week 1 where it was year 8s. It was the last lesson on a Friday. And this kid walked in and went, "Hi miss, we're going to be workshopping our paragraphs today." And I didn't want to because my brain was fried. I'd had seniors a lot that day. But you don't say no. If a student walks in doing that, they want to see their work up there and they want to see how it can be improved. And so we did. it. And that's also what I was saying in week 1. In some of these paragraphs, and you'll see it if you watch any of these, is that there's a lot of marking in their work at the start of the year. So when you turn the data projector off, you've got all these scratchings, all your marked, all your whiteboard marks. At the end of the year, I would always do a similar activity, and I'd turn the data projector off, and I'd say, "See, Lynn, remember what your paragraphs looked like at the start of the year? Now when we turn the data projector off, there might be only one or 2 or 3 corrections or additions." And they just get such a rush because it's black and white, it's so visual, and they've lived this experience all the way through. So, doing stuff like that in your teaching, learning and assessment plan is really invaluable. Like you say, and like Beth, right? You said too, the Padlet was being used, but what was the next step? What was then being done with it? And this is the thing. So my students use Edmodo absolutely all the time, and a lot of the work was done at the back end of it in the classroom together. There was even one year where the year 8s brought in a few punishments and things which you have to be careful about, like sit-ups and push-ups if they used comma splices and things after we've done a lot of work on those, You probably wouldn't get away with that in a lot of schools, but they wanted to do it, and I let it go for a little while, and then I decided no, that wasn't a good idea.
Is this like extended English or something?
No!
Absolute dweebs, absolute English nerds. notes. That's awesome. That's so cool.
No, they weren't.
Yeah.
They weren't.
I remember like on prac we had like this like extended English class